What we're also seeing in terms of work is the disappearance of repetitive tasks. And this is something that's predicted for all sectors of the economy. But what they're also saying is there's a much broader definition of repetitive tasks than we could possibly imagine. Even things like reference questions that are asked continually, time and time again, are repetitive tasks. And while we've had enormous growth in public libraries, the one area that we haven't had growth in is reference, where there have been, and the different studies, the first one I saw was in San Jose, we did one in Hamilton. The one we did in Hamilton, we actually shadowed staff in branches and in Central Library for 230 hours. We kept track of absolutely every question, and the reason we did the shadowing was we wanted the terms that we're using in terms of reference to be used consistently throughout the entire system, and discovered that true reference questions composed 15% of the reference questions that were being asked to staff, 15, and that there was no difference between questions that were being asked at the Central Library that were being asked at branch libraries, not a thing in terms of what people's expectations. If you're a library, you're open because you have electronic resources, we should be able to answer that question everywhere. So what I'm saying is that what we're witnessing to a certain extent is the death of standard reference. And in fact, Joe Janes, right down the street from the University of Washington, the Association of Deans, says that if reference, and he's the reference guru in the United States, says that if reference is not dead, it's at least on life support. So to an extent, it's a waiting for Godot type of a job. We can't afford to have highly paid, good, professional staff that are doing jobs that are, to an extent, not consuming the vast majority of their time in professional activities. So we need those community-focused librarians. We need them to be project managers, and we need that desperately so that libraries aren't doing one thing at a time where everything filters through a senior management, but everybody understands the mission, and we can accomplish many different types of things at the same time, not always done by librarians, but by paraprofessionals or by the staff within the organization. We need them to work as trainers. We need them to work as mentors. The larger things really is that the brand, and when I started, there was a certain element of competition where you'd say, our library is really good, the neighboring library, not so good, our library does this great, we're terrific, And you'd love it when somebody came in and talked about how good you were, and you'd even love it even more if they came in and trashed the library next door, yes, that's great, yes, because we're good. But I think the growing realization is that people move around and that the brand itself is library. The brand is not the blank library, the brand is library. And that we sort of will sink or float depending upon the value of that particular brand overall. And we need to work to a great extent on what that means, what it means in terms of standards, to make sure that libraries are presenting an element of service. And in some areas, such as ebooks, it means that a small unit of a library can't possibly negotiate those contracts or even afford the depth of the collection that is going to be available. So we have to work together. We have to figure out what component of it is community-focused and is delivered by the local library board, and what components of our service have to be delivered by a broader organization, whether it's provincial or regional or within a certain area. And I think the reason for that, as I mentioned in the slide, is that technology doesn't recognize boundaries. It doesn't recognize school board boundaries. It doesn't recognize municipal boundaries. And we have a huge example of where that's been a failure, databases, where the public has really never taken to the databases. And one of the reasons they haven't is because this library bought the database, but this school board didn't buy the database, but this library went over here did. So we need to do all the authentication steps to make sure that they actually are valid and have the access to it. This one has access. We need to put in the card and make sure they have it. But those create so many roadblocks that we haven't been able to direct people to what is very good material. But if actually the license was for an entire project, or for an entire province, and for any sector within that province, then we could manage to remove those roadblocks and make it so that it's easier for people to access very good material. And that's going to become critical as we begin to move to ebooks and a larger component of our collections being electronic. And as I say, we can't be diverted by the shining ball. The final thought really is that as long as people expect to be paid for the creation of ideas and for story, then people who crave stories, people who crave ideas, people who crave information will not be able to pay for their habit, at least at some point in their lives. And what I mean by the fact that this does not mean the digital divide is, I have a good income, and I can't afford it. I'm a curious person. I like to read a lot. I read 4 or 5 books a week. I read endlessly in the number of articles. I cannot afford my own reading habits. I need libraries in order to support my own needs. And that's something that is not the digital divide. It means everybody within the community, anybody who has curiosity, anybody who seeks ideas, should be able to know that there is an institution that supports them and that it is the public library. The final element, and it's the same image that I used at the very beginning, took this last spring in Antigua, actually. And my point really is that after I took that picture, 2 minutes later, it was completely different. The sky was different than when it is that I took that picture. So when I'm talking to you now, it's December the 6th, 2012. And if I was to give this speech to you 6 months from now, it would be completely different as well. That what I'm really giving you is my point, or my thoughts at least, as a moment in time. Thank you.